All right. Welcome everybody to our church outreach webinar for today. So what's the first day of summer? Is word on the street. And definitely feels like summer here in Virginia. So
Florida too.
Yeah. So what we're gonna here's our agenda for today. I'm just gonna kind of recap our goals and give an overview of these 7 levels of sermon publishing that we're working on. And then we're gonna get into some detailed nuts and bolts related to podcasting. And then we'll have time for Q&A, and then we'll also talk about the free bonus, early access to the new online course, and then spend a couple minutes about our church outreach incubator cohort, which is a paid service. Where the next cohort is, we have room for 2 churches. That's starting in July, I guess just a couple of weeks. So we do have at least 1 church that is seriously considering that. But I'll talk more about that later. But the basic idea is, if you're liking the things that we're going through, all these different tips and techniques and how-tos that we're going through, but you're just kind of at a place where you just want 5 more talents to do it for you, at least to kind of get you started. And that would be a reason why you might want to consider the incubator. But let's get into the fun stuff. So the goal of this is, these webinars, is to equip you with outreach methods, including advertising. And ultimately, we plan to do both in the coming weeks, to address both online and as well as offline examples of advertising. So we do have a partner that we can work with to do offline campaigns. So some point in the next few months, we'll talk a little bit more about direct mail and billboard options, but really the majority of our focus is on online advertising. Publishing newsletters is another part of outreach. Organizing and promoting public meetings, seminars, and conferences is part of outreach, like a vacation Bible school or a missions conference or a Bible conference or something like that. And then our current series topic, which is distributing recordings and transcripts of sermons and teaching. So here's a glimpse at our schedule. So right now we're going through the 7 levels of sermon publishing. And in previous webinars, we have looked at the concept of adding each new sermon recording to your website on its own page. Last time we looked at organizing your sermon library by scripture, book, and series. And today we're talking about configuring a sermon podcast feed and syndicating it via podcast platforms like Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Those are the 2 big ones. Next Thursday, we'll be getting into the details of adding full text sermon transcripts, because as we've been discussing a lot lately, the website traffic stats show that when you add a full text transcript, you can over time increase the website traffic to your website, 3 times, 5 times, even 25 times. If you stick with it over the course of a few years, it could be 25 times. I mean, imagine that, 25 times more traffic to your website than it's getting today. And then in future weeks, we'll delve into social media as a way to publish sermons, and then YouTube, which is last time I checked is basically the first or second most popular search engine / social media platform. A lot of people spend a lot of time on YouTube, so it's a good place to have your sermons published. All right, so as we go through this, I'm going to talk about why. But as we go through this, I guess first thing I just want to point out is we do have in the chat, I did share some links, and the top 2 links are how-to guides. So we are recording today. There's also these how-to guides that walk you through the different steps. So we have all of the how-tos from past weeks, as well as how-tos from what we're talking about today. Like in a minute, we'll be talking about creating a podcast cover image on Canva. So you do have those sermon publishing guides. There's 2 versions of that. One is if you're using a site based on Goodwin or Machen, which there's actually nobody has a site based on Machen yet, but some of you may have a site based off of Goodwin. Or this guide, if you have a site based off of one of the other 5 starter sites, then this would be the guide for you. But as we go through this, just go ahead and start putting questions into chat, and then we'll get to them before the end of our time today. So why podcast? Why syndicate sermons on podcast platforms? Let me just ask for a show of hands. Just raise your hand if you have listened to a podcast this month. All right, it looks like we got maybe a little over half of us. All right, now raise your hand if you've listened to a podcast this week. Okay, so maybe a little bit less than half of us. All right, so basically what this is showing here is that there's about 34% of people in the US 12 years and older listen to a podcast every week. And then another 33% listen occasionally, maybe monthly. And basically what we mean by this is the way that most people listen to podcasts is through an app on their mobile device. So on their smartphone or their tablet, there's a podcast app. Maybe it's the Apple Podcast app or the Spotify app. Those are the 2 most popular. So you can see here, you can access a podcast via your web browser. There's a bunch of different ways, but the main thing people are doing is they're using their phone or their tablet and using the Apple Podcasts app and subscribing to podcasts that way, or they're using Spotify, which also has both a website and an app, and doing the same thing. So you can see that's a big piece of the pie between Apple Podcasts and Spotify. That's the majority of it. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today, is how do you get a podcast of your sermons on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. All right, so one of the things you're going to need is a podcast cover image. And Canva is a website that makes it easy to do this. So you just go to canva.com, canva.com. And I've already logged into this, so it's saved my information. I'm just going to click continue. If you've never logged into it before, you can log in using other popular like a Google account or a different type of account you probably already have, or you can just create a username and password. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and log in with my account. All right, and then you want to click on create a design. This is really just going to take a few minutes. It's amazing. So you click on create a design and you search for podcast cover. And then just click on podcast cover. All right, so I'm going to just show you how you can work with a template. So here on the left, you see a bunch of different templates. And let's see. I'm going to choose this one. All right, so you can find one that looks interesting. Then you can do additional editing to it. So you just click and you can just make it say what you want to say. You can change the colors on things. You can have fun with the fonts. You can move things around. It gives you some nice grid lines. All right, you don't want something on there, you can just click delete. All right, so obviously you could spend a great deal of time fiddling with Canva, and if that's your thing, it can be a lot of fun. But this is already looking good enough for our purposes today. So once you have it looking the way you want it, you just click share and then download. And it does suggest PNG format, but for this type of image, I recommend actually a JPEG. And the nice thing about using these Canva templates is it already has it to a proper resolution. And so 3000 by 3000 pixels. We'll see a little bit later on that when you're submitting these podcast feeds that there can be verification issues. So let me get this over here. There's our podcast cover image. All right, so that is how to create a podcast cover image. Any quick, since we have a little bit of a smaller group today, any questions about that? Burning questions. All right, seeing no questions, let's continue on to the next step. So the next step is, there's really two parts to this process, is that you can kind of see it a little bit better using this view. So basically, you're going to, we've just went through the step of creating your cover image. Then you're going to configure your sermon podcast feed on WordPress. And it's going to be different depending on which of our starter sites you're using. And then the third thing is you're going to submit the podcast feed to Apple Podcasts and Spotify. All right, so now we're going to look at two different ways that you can configure your sermon podcast feed. All right, so for those of you who are using Ames, Baxter, Charnock, Spring, or Flavel, this is a time to tune in and pay attention. So what you're going to do is go to your dashboard and click on Sermons and Podcast. All right, and then you're going to choose your image. I'm going to upload that image I created a moment ago. All right, and there's just a bunch of things to fill out, and it indicates there's certain things that are required. I filled in a title, a subtitle, a description. You really ought to have a more extensive description than this. You want to just be descriptive and clear about what's in it. Wouldn't be a bad idea to include a link to your website. The provider would just be the name of your church. Here's where you add a copyright statement. If you want people to link to a certain page on your website, you could put that there. I do recommend you put in an email address. I'm not sure that Apple Podcasts require this, but Spotify definitely does. And then here's where you indicate the category. And then there's whether there's explicit content, the language, and then these last three things typically you're not going to need to do anything with. So once you've done all that, you just click Save Changes, and you're done as far as configuring the podcast feed. What I do recommend you do, though, is, although this is maybe not for the faint of heart, you open this and look at the code, and you just got to, maybe basically what you're looking for is a line that says pub date. And you just see here that, okay, yeah, that is the most recent sermon that was posted. So it doesn't hurt just to double check that you see that most recent sermon there in the feed. All right, so I see there's something in the chat. Okay, Ron, good question. You're not using any of the themes. So it's based off of the plugin. So in the case of your church, Ron, you're using the Advanced Sermons Pro plugin. So we're gonna deal with that next. All right. So let's look now at how to configure the sermon podcast feed if you're using a site that has the Advanced Sermons Pro plugin. So for those websites that are based off of the Goodwin template or the new Machen template that we're wrapping up, this is where you definitely need to tune in and pay attention. So let's go. I think we can close Canva now. Let's go over to Machen. And so first, there is a plugin that needs to be installed. So if you're here today or you're watching the recording of this and you don't see this menu item that says podcasting, then you'll just need to contact us and we can install the plugin. It's called Simple Podcasting, Seriously Simple Podcasting. But assuming you already see that there, then you're going to click on Settings. First thing you need to do is just verify that the sermons post type is checked. And you can just click Save Settings. All right, the next thing you want to do, and this is, you'll see this is very similar to what we did in the previous example, is you want to give the feed details. So you list the title, the subtitle, the host. You at least want to list the primary category and subcategory. You can provide these additional categories if you want. And then also the description or summary of the podcast. All right, and then the cover image. So we're going to put in our new image. Right, and then the owner name, I think probably a good thing to put here would be the name of the church. And email address, Spotify requires that. Language is defaults to, you can just stick with the default, put your copyright. And these other things you don't really need to put in there. Basically, that is, the rest of this are just the defaults, and you can at that point just click Save Settings. So once you have done that, then you can click View Feed. And here's what it looks like. The nice thing about this is that it is a more friendly appearance of it, although it does kind of look like it's, there we go. Okay, now we got our new podcast cover image in there, but you can see the items that are in there. So the next thing you need to do is go over to your sermons, and let's say that you already have a bunch of sermons on your website, but they are, you haven't, this is like you're just starting the podcast now. So what you're going to need to do, and this is an extra step if you're using the Advanced Sermons Pro plugin. I wish there wasn't this extra step, but this extra step is required. So what you're going to do is you start going through your sermons, and whichever ones you want to appear in the podcast, you need to take this extra step I'm going to show you. So so what you need to do, see, I'm here in the sermon details section, and let me just go ahead and let me show you what not to do first. So what you want this link, okay? And it needs to go here under the podcast episode details. Then you can click update. So that part's fine, but you're going to see the problem, I think, once we view this. It's an easy to solve problem, but so you can see here, here's the problem, is now we have two audio players, which is going to be tacky and annoying for the website users. So thankfully that's easy to fix. What I recommend you do is just remove that audio file from the sermon details and instead put it under, and keep it where we just put it a moment ago under the podcast details. So now you can see we just have the podcast details there. All right, and then, it's, as you're doing these things, it's never a bad idea just to kind of double check that it's being added to the feed properly. And so you can do that again just by going to settings, and I think feed details will work. And just click view feed, see if it's there. If you don't see it there, you might need to refresh it, and it looks like now it's there. Okay, so that is how you configure your podcast feed if you're using a site, use it with the Advanced Sermons Pro plugin. So I see there's a question from Laura. Laura, do you want to unmute yourself and
Sure. Yeah.
question?
I thought this could be a question that might come up. So this seems to only affect churches if you upload an MP3.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Okay. So for churches that are doing sermon audio,
right,
this type of situation won't work.
Right. Yeah. I think that might be something we want to look into for a, I don't know, maybe some additional content that we create, or an additional webinar or something, because it's my understanding that if you're using sermonaudio.com, you can, let's take a look here. Click on Arnie and Ron. I think you all are in Sermon Audio, right?
Yes, he is.
Okay. There it is. All right, so yeah, here's an RSS feed. So basically, you're using sermonaudio.com, you can just get your RSS feed. It's already generating that. So probably you don't even need to do either of those steps. Okay, what I would recommend is we're going to get into momentarily, and Laura is going to show how to connect the feed to Apple Podcasts, and then I'll show how to connect it to Spotify. Basically, rather than go through those steps I just showed you, if you're using sermonaudio.com, just grab this RSS feed and just submit that directly to Apple Podcasts and Spotify, because they're already creating this feed. All right, so the next thing is submitting the podcast feed to Apple Podcasts. So I think that is Laura's turn.
Yes. Okay. I'll share my screen here.
Yep, it's ready for you now.
Great. Okay. So we do have a helpful step-by-step for this. This is going to be once you already have an Apple ID, you'll go through these types of steps. So this particular website, it will be podcasters.apple.com. That's where you get started, and you'll see sign in. And if you don't have an Apple ID, we do have a step-by-step instruction on how to sign in. But once you do sign in, you'll see, I already have 2 podcasts here, but what you'll see here is something to the effect of add a podcast. You can have more than one. So I'm going to add a new one here, and you'll see you can add a new show, because that's where you would get started with the sermons coming from your website. So it'll be a new show, and then it'll ask you, we're going to add this show with an RSS feed. And this is the one that we've created through the Advanced Sermons Pro option through that podcast app or podcast plugin that Daniel was showing. So we are going to choose the RSS feed one, and this is where you're going to paste in what comes from that particular area of the website. Daniel, you may have to remind me, that's within the plugin for the podcast.
Yeah, it's just going to be on the podcast settings page.
Okay, yeah.
That's where it's displayed.
Yes. So that is all that it needs. And then if I click add, Apple will take that and start processing it. Now this part actually takes a little bit, and if you leave this open, you'll see it may say we're still processing show details, and come back later. The eventual thing you're going to want to do is publish, but I took a couple of screenshots just to show this. It takes less than 24 hours for sure. And you may just have to continue to either just leave this tab open or go back to that same website, the podcasters.apple.com, and just check. But I'll show you that in a second. While you're waiting, I guess you can fill out some of this information. And I know Daniel said that you may have to have an email for Spotify, but it's a good idea, I think, to have a show contact here with Apple as well. So you would put in all your name information here. I think it's good to also check this show does not contain third-party content. I would assume it doesn't if it's just your sermon. And there's a couple other things for you to fill out here with availability. And I think these other 2 you really wouldn't touch necessarily. But all of the default things that it has is going to work just fine. So you don't have to worry too much about some of this other stuff. But I will show you once this is processed by Apple, it should look something like this. Let me show some screenshots here. I think that was my other one. So it should look something like this, where you'll see the name of the podcast that's pulling that name from your website. And your final action you're going to take is you're going to click publish, and that's going to officially move it over to Apple. Personally, when I've done this, even once you hit publish, it may take 30 minutes to an hour before you officially see it on Apple Podcasts. I know this is more of the Mac world and the Apple world, so if you have an Android, you may not see the podcast show up, but you you may be able to you'll be able to see that it's published and kind of trust it that way, or you can have someone who has an iPhone just make sure that they're seeing the latest one. And then the other thing you'll see is to share that with someone easily, you can go to the bottom of this whole section here and copy this URL, and that will open up the podcast in someone's iPhone. So that's an easy way to share that with them. I think that's all I had. It really is once you have the Apple ID part, that can be tricky, but once you're in, submitting it is really easy once you have it set up in the website. I don't know if Ron, is that Apple feed URL the URL we would use to pass our servant audio. So that's the URL is from the website that after you would submit all that information that Daniel said, that's what you copy and paste into this. Yeah.
Yeah, so you could where it says with what you have up on the screen, Laura, where it says under RSS feed where it says URL.
Yes.
And you could just edit that, and instead of what's there, you could paste in the RSS feed URL from Sermon Audio.
Ah, yes. Okay, I see the question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions with this setup? Okay.
I guess not. All right, thank you, Laura.
Yeah.
All right, last step here is submitting your podcast feed to Spotify. So it's very similar principle to what Laura was just showing with Apple Podcasts. So you go to podcasters.spotify.com. As we looked at earlier in this webinar, it's about 1/3 of people use Spotify to listen to podcasts, and 1/3 use Apple Podcasts. So wasn't the case a few years ago, but today you really should have your podcast on both of these platforms. What you'll see is once you have your feed established, you can get it connected to both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So let's look at this. You just click sign up, and you can use one of your existing accounts or create a new one. I'm just going to use my existing Google account. All right, and you can see here is one that I previously put in. And I'm going to go ahead and click add a new podcast. And basically, if this is the first one that you're creating, this is basically what the first screen that you're going to see. So I'm going to click, this might be a little bit confusing, but you want to click, I already have a podcast, because you already have a podcast feed. All right, and then here is where you paste your RSS feed link. So I'm going to grab the one from Spring, but just to differentiate it, I'm going to change the image back to this one. Of course, that's going to change it over on Apple as well. But here's the feed URL. So I'm going to copy that link address and paste it. And then it's going to validate it. And it's not uncommon that in this case, it says it looks good. Don't get discouraged if something red pops up like, oh, something is missing. If you find that something is missing, it'll tell you, oh, we didn't find an image, or oh, you didn't put in your email address. So typically all that means is you need to go back to your screen in WordPress, and you just need to go through these different fields and make sure you have everything filled in. All right, so that's in there, and we click next. Oh, see, this is going to be a problem because this email address doesn't exist. I'm going to go back, and I'm going to go ahead and change this to my email address. And now I'm going to go ahead and close these other tabs. I'm gonna just have it validate it again. Okay, now it has the correct email address. I'm going to click send code. And then let's see if I can get that. My other screen where I'm checking my email. All right, here we go. All right, I'll click next. And then just ask you a few more questions. You can leave the hosting provider as other, I don't know, that's fine. And then Spotify's categories are a little bit different. So for a church, probably lifestyle and health is probably what you want to use. So here you can put Christianity. And if you want to add additional categories, you can. All right, and then we can click submit. That's basically it. And then you can click done, and then let's see what happens here. Okay, so now basically there's two different podcasts that I can toggle back and forth between. One thing that it seems like Spotify does a little bit, well, maybe Laura, this is a question I have for you. So I know you're using both Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Do both of them provide stats on the usage? Spotify seems to make the stats very prominent, but
Yeah, I have not seen the stats from Apple. I don't know if it shows it in that. I would, yeah. This is very helpful.
yeah, Spotify will actually show how many listeners you have and how many people are, starting the episodes. So that's really handy to have that information. All right, so that is the process. It's hope you can see it's pretty straightforward. All right, Swain, you have a great question. Maybe do you want to unmute yourself and just recap that?
Yes, we were set up with Google Podcast, received the email that was going away, and we needed to move to YouTube podcast. So I went through all the YouTube process, and it got to the point of verifying my ID through Google. And there was two options. There was one, take a 30-second video of myself. Didn't want to do that. And then the other was taking a photo of my driver's license. So, which I had to do through the Google website, but the photo quality was terrible. It was blurry, and no matter what lighting I used, moved my phone in and out, couldn't get it to focus. I read online, maybe going out in the sunlight could help. I haven't tried that yet, but anyway, it didn't pass. I submitted it and they said no. And then it gave me kind of a warning. If it fails again, then you're going to be like barred for 30 days or something. So I didn't know if anyone else was having that problem or had a solution. And plus the Kentucky driver's licenses, they're terrible. They're black and white. They're blurry. And I think it only needs to read my birth date. So not even my photo. So it couldn't even pick up the text. So anyway, that's the story.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say the first thing that's going through my brain is possible candidate for the mark of the beast. But yeah, I mean, it's in I haven't run into that particular problem, but yeah, I mean, it's either Google verification for different things like a Google business profile. It can be tricky sometimes. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what to tell you really, other than you could use the Google.
I ran into something similar recently. I spent days trying to use the photo app that was provided by the endpoint on my iPhone, and I just could never get it right with their app. So ultimately, I was able to find an upload option. So maybe maybe the site you're dealing with will provide an upload option. And then what I did was went offline with my iPhone camera and took photographs of my driver's license front and back, where I could really control it. And then I uploaded those, and it went through.
Okay, I may give that a try. See if I can find that with Android and Android phone and on Google, or maybe they've improved it.
Make sure your camera, what is it called? The pixels per inch is set to the maximum, so you get the finest, best photograph. It varies, and you can change it somewhere in there in the phone, in the photography app.
Okay, I'll double check. Yeah, the driver's license looks great on my phone. It's awful on that Google web page that wants to verify my ID.
Maybe the graphics on your computer needs to be tweaked a little bit. Your camera, is that where you take the picture for Google?
No, it was requiring me to do it using my phone.
Oh, really? Okay. No further ideas. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
That's okay. Thanks.
Yeah, you're not alone, Swain. There's these verifications can be tricky sometimes. So
I may just drop YouTube and move to Spotify because we're not using Spotify. I have iHeartRadio, Apple, TuneIn, and yeah, maybe I'll add Spotify and just forget about YouTube.
that may be, yeah, that would not be at all unjustified, because the stats say that most people use Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So
Just
Okay.
one final thought. This may seem, well, have you Googled the problem?
Not in a while. Yeah, I did Google, and that's where I got the suggestions to take the photo out, in sunlight, and some other ideas. But yeah, it's been a while since I've tried it. Thanks.
all right, any other questions today, either about sermon publishing or just about church outreach in general, advertising, promoting events, doing a newsletter, or anything else about sermon publishing?
Daniel, our team is not among the several you've mentioned. Are we going to be able to use everything you have been describing over the last several meetings? Are we going to be able to implement all of that within our team, or do we need to upgrade? And if we do need to upgrade, which of the themes would give us the best future options? That is, which one is the newest and best?
Right. Okay. So you do not need to upgrade to do any of the things that we've been demonstrating, because it's plugin dependent rather than theme dependent. So basically everything I've demonstrated either uses the Advanced Sermons Pro plugin, which is basically compatible with any WordPress theme. So yeah, so that's not an issue. As far as the different starter templates. You know, I would say there's pros and cons of we can just compare Spring versus Machen, right? So there's pros and cons either way. They do use different sets of plugins. So here is Machen, which we're just putting some finishing touches on. And the big difference between using Machen or Goodwin is basically uses the same collection of plugins and the same base WordPress theme. On the one hand, it gives you more flexibility in a very specific way. So it gives you more flexibility in editing your homepage. So if we look at the homepage of Machen, and this would also apply to the Goodwin starter site, you can see here it's basically you can click on anything and edit it, right? Everything, every little component can be edited, right? You can even add, you know, completely new blocks. So it is very, very flexible on the homepage. If we contrast that to Spring, and this would apply to Ames, Baxter, Charnock, Flavel, the way that the homepage works on these themes, which are compatible with the church content plugin, is rather than using the WordPress block editor to edit the homepage, you actually go to the customizer and then to widgets. And then to edit the homepage, you work with these widgets. So for example, if you want to change what this first area says, then you expand this first widget, and then you just start making edits here on the left, and then it updates it on the right. And there's all different options, and you can fill in different links, and you know, there's lots of different options. And you can move things around. So let's say you wanted to put the church potluck before the sermons. Sounds tasty. Then you could you can just drag and drop that way. But you can see it's a different way that the homepage is managed. So Holly, did you want to, you mentioned the, okay, you put something, the link. So I will show that. Holly put a link to a news site that we're building. So this would be another example of, it looks really good, of a site that we're building based off of the Machen starter site. And you can see that this looks, if we compare that to, where'd it go? Here we go. Let's compare that side by side with Machen. So actually, yeah, both of these sites had the same starting point, but you can see that it's quite a bit customized from the starting point of Machen, the color scheme, the layout, and so on and so forth. So it's a good example. All right. Feel free to jump in if you have any other questions. I'm going to go ahead and talk about our free bonus now. So our free bonus is early access to our first ever course, Build a Church Website with WordPress. This is really a course that's geared towards someone that is wanting to do a do-it-yourself project, but there are still some things in here that even if you don't want to do the entire project yourself, there's, for example, this whole section on mastering the WordPress block editor. And this talks about understanding the block editor interface, adding featured images to pages, and you can see these other topics. Each one of these topics, once you get inside, you will see that there is a video and there's also a written how-to instructions on each of these things. So if you're interested in kicking the tires or really just getting early access to this, I'm going to put this link in the chat where with a code which will basically reduce the price to 0. So if you take that code Soli Deo Gloria and click take this course, then you'll fill in your information, and then after you click the register screen, you'll see a place you can put in the coupon code, and you won't have to pay anything, and you'll just get access to the course. So I do see another question there in the chat. Ron, great question. How does SEO apply to podcasting? So one of the benefits, and we'll just do a flying by the seat of our pants experiment. So I'm going to type in the name of a church that I know has podcast. Laura should be on both Apple and Spotify, right?
Right, correct.
Okay. So let's say somebody searches for the name of the church. So here I see the website, I see the Google Maps profile, I see their Facebook page, I see their YouTube page, I see Yelp, I see Instagram, I see the denominational directory, I see sermon audio and X, and I was wondering if I was going to see the podcast on here. Sometimes you'll see the podcast show up. Let's try one more experiment. Use my church here. So we see YouTube. I'm not seeing that there, but let's try one other thing. So we'll say CTK Roanoke podcast. Okay, here we go. So Apple, I'm not 100% sure about Spotify, but I would imagine Spotify does the same thing. So you can see here, there is a page on apple.com that that does host the podcast. And then each episode also gets its own page. So I would say, Ron, what I would do is explore ways to make sure that you have as robust of a description as possible. In this case, I think I would maybe in hindsight, I would maybe label this as like the sermons of Christ the King Presbyterian Church or something like that. I might change the name of it. But another thing would be the text that is displayed here. So if you could be more descriptive in what that sermon page says. I think that's just pulling it in from the sermon page on the website. So the kinds of things we're going to be talking about next week, actually, with the full text sermon transcripts and making the page for each individual sermon as detailed as possible would definitely be helpful, because Google does index these pages. So
I wondered if I might ask a question relating to next week's. Specifically with transcripts, what is your take on it being like an auto transcript that's not corrected versus correcting it, considering the use case and the chances of people actually reading the full transcript?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think the reason why we're talking about full text transcripts is just because of our case study comparing church websites that post a full text sermon transcript versus those that do not. And by posting the full text and then doing a few little things with just how you name and label those pages, which we'll get into the details of that next time. You know, you can a site that does the full text transcripts will be 5 or 10 times, or some cases like 100 times, you know, the traffic of the church website that just, you know, just posts an audio file or a video file. So that's why we're talking about this. But my take on that specific question is that I would recommend, on the one hand, just, you know, just kind of getting it out there, right, is good. Like there's a ton of value in that just from a search engine optimization standpoint. What I'm going to talk about next week is just going through the extra step of putting in a few headings, at least, that correspond to the main parts of the sermon, because that could correspond to some of the things in the Yoast SEO tool. So my opinion, it's shouldn't be too much extra work to add those additional headings in most cases, but it would.
Even some opportunity for AI to do that nowadays.
Yeah, so we're going to talk more about that next week. So love to hear more of your thoughts on that as well. Yeah. All right. All right, last thing for today, the Church Outreach Incubator. This is a service that is designed to come alongside churches that are looking for and praying for and working toward a transformation in the life of the church. Maybe they're a mission work, but they're moving towards becoming an organized church, or trying to make changes to get more visitors. So that's what this is designed for. And it's basically, it's a 12-month program. Starts off being mostly or almost entirely done for you, transitions into being done with you, and then transitions into where you are, you have people and systems and processes in place to where you're handling it by yourself at the church. And we do have an introductory rate on this. So you can see we are not planning to make this available again until probably October at the earliest. So if you are interested in this, please book a meeting with Laura, or if you're interested in talking more about website upgrade options, also reach out to Laura. So I'll put her link in the chat. But right now, if you're interested in this, we do have this introductory rate. Part of the fees, which we could get into in a meeting, part of the fees just go to paying Facebook or YouTube or for online ads. And then part of it is paid to 5 More Talents for the services that we provide. So it's a new option that we're rolling out that is there for those of you who are wanting to to do all of these different things related to outreach that we've been talking about, but you know, feel like you need a lot of help putting it together at this time. So, but it's not the right fit for everybody. So that's why we're going to continue to do these weekly webinars. Our next one will be next Thursday at the same time, and we'll talk about full text publishing then. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Dan.
Yep. See you then.
Thank you.